Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to my first dedicated minimalist watercolor class in specifically using three colors called a triad, plus my two favorite extra colors. And we'll be getting started in just a moment. I'll introduce Grace Howard. Grace, go ahead and unmute and say hello, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Grace. I am the technical person here, so any questions or anything you field to me, and then I'll make sure Roseanne gets them. I'm an environmental science and Spanish major at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, so that's my background, and yeah.
Grace and I have been working together for over 10 years now. Yeah. And so it's been a lot of fun to have her helping out. We are going to start with, I'm going to start with a presentation and explain some things because I'm the type of person that I remember things a lot better if I understand why. And so I'm going to give some background on colors, actually what is watercolor, that I think will help you kind of understand when people throw out these terms. I'm operating on the assumption that almost everybody here is pretty darn new, maybe even never picked up watercolor. And I remember, I'm completely self-taught. And I remember starting out, I'd read books or I took classes, and there were so much, like people would just throw out words and phrases and things like granulating and lifting and just assume I knew what they were talking about. Or, you always use a warm color to do this, or do a split primary triad. And it's like, whoa, I have no idea what they're talking about. So I'm going to try to go back and reset and bring us all up to the same level. And I learned a lot doing the prep for this workshop. So it was a lot of fun. So without anything more, I will jump into the presentation. Then I'm going to go to demos. And so I'll be demoing what I was talking about. You will paint along if you've got your paints. And then we're going to do, after the demos, I'll also be doing some, I've got some leaves and seeds and things. We're going to practice mixing colors for reds and greens and different greens. And I'll have those up on the screen so you can see what I'm doing. And you'll also paint along with that so you can practice doing colors. And then I'll end by coming back if we have time to do kind of a final tips and tricks, some fun extra ways you can quickly augment your watercolor in your field notebooks and nature journals. I'm Roseanne Hansen, as you guys know, and I am the Art and Science Program Coordinator at the University of Arizona's Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill. I'm a naturalist and author, an explorer. I've spent many decades keeping field notebooks, nature journals. In fact, about 35, 40 years worth. And I'm self-taught when it comes to sketching and watercolor. And so I really enjoy passing along what I've learned and teaching people to, and getting people really enthusiastic about nature journaling and field sketching and keeping field notes, because I think it's a really, really important way to connect with nature and improve your own kind of sense of well-being as well. So as I sort of mentioned earlier, when you try to get into color, you get thrown all this stuff. You get all this nomenclature, complementary, analogous colors, triad, split complementary. Oh my goodness, warm colors, cool colors. Then it can get like, you can go way down the rabbit hole. In fact, the rabbit hole can be extremely deep, like this very complicated, comprehensive way people will try to convince you need to do a 27 color palette with warms and cools and all the hues in between and many hues and et cetera, et cetera. And consequently, beginners end up with dozens of colors. Then people will say, oh, well, then you need to create color charts. And you can go down these incredible, again, rabbit holes like Warren's of creating these really complicated color charts, which is a good exercise. But if you're just beginning and you don't really understand what this is all about, then, oops, this is not going the way it's supposed to. If you don't really understand, then what can happen is you get very confused out in the field. You're trying to sketch something, add some color out in the field, and you just get completely bogged down in trying to choose the right colors because you've got so many on your palette. So that way of painting is entirely appropriate. But I think if you're in a studio, that is when that works best, when you're in a very controlled studious environment where you have plenty of time to plan and work through your different color wheels and relationships and things like that. But we're here because we're nature journalers, field sketchers. We're out, we want to work like this. We want to work in the field, quickly adding color without spending hours pulling your hair out because you can't figure out what warm red to mix with which blue to get which violet, et cetera, et cetera. So going, when I discovered that there was a whole different way to kind of think about it in terms of triads, which is 3 primary colors, I was like, a light bulb went bing. Wow, okay, I can do this because it's so much more simple. I can mix any colors I need with 3 primary colors. And then over the years, I'm trial and error and just reading and getting tips from other painters, adding 2 extra colors, which we'll be going into. And that's all I need. I can create an amazing array of everything that I need for nature journaling, field sketching. But before we go into that, as I said, what we're going to do is talk about some basics, because once you understand some of these things, it will help you when you're trying to think about paint. So what is paint? So paint is literally pigment particles, dry ground pigment, bound into a medium with either, water, that's watercolor, oil, that's oil paint, egg yolk or egg white, which is called casein, which is protein based, or an acrylic polymer emulsion, which are acrylic paints. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because pigment characteristics, the actual pigment, and what it's bound with and other additives do affect a paint's behavior and the way it looks. So how it's textured, whether it's transparent, whether it's opaque, and so on. And we're going to talk about that. So briefly, the other things that are in watercolor are binder. So that literally helps it stick to your paper. It's often gum arabic, which is a plant resin. And then there's some other stuff in there. And the reason I'm mentioning these, a humectant, which helps the paint retain moisture, a dispersant, which helps prevent clumping and makes it flow nicely across the page, and a fungicide to help keep them from getting all moldy. The reason I'm mentioning that is because I'll harp on this, is don't go cheap in your watercolors. And the reason is all those excellent additives make for a much better quality paint and experience for you. So when you're starting out, the biggest, I don't want to say mistake, but it is a mistake if you're just starting out and you go, oh, I'm just going to go to Michael's and buy a $10 palette to see if I like watercolor, if I can do it. And then you get frustrated because it won't behave right. It looks horrible. And there's a lot of reasons it does. And I'll show you some examples. But really good quality artist grade pigment watercolors covers better, lasts longer, and mixes better. Some brand names that are well known out there that you'll want to work with Daniel Smith, one of my favorites, Winsor & Newton, Schminke Hardam, M. Graham, Core, spelled Qor, and my actually near and dear to my heart, a favorite handmade watercolors by Greenleaf and Blueberry, which is it's just Greenleaf in Colorado. And she makes amazing watercolors. So let's look at what these look like. When you're looking at how these paints look on the paper, you'll see that cheap palette from Michaels. Cheap paint often has filler, chalk, white stuff that just to make it go better. It's not high grade pigment and it gets muddy and it's not bright and pretty. And you can see down as we go down the Daniel Smith tube paints, how much more clear, bright, beautiful they are. And the Greenleaf and Blueberry handmade paints, which come only in pans, not in tubes, are like the most dense colors I've ever seen. They're absolutely amazing. And that is in order of how expensive this stuff is too. I mean, Daniel Smith tube paints, tube, a 5 milliliter tube, it'll be $9 to $12, $13, maybe $14, depending on the color. However, though that tube will last sometimes half a year or more, depending on how much painting. Greenleaf and Blueberry, one little pan might be $15 to $20. So it's all, quality is commensurate price-wise. So now let's delve into the actual colors. So what are primaries, what are secondaries, and what are tertiaries? Those are really important to understand at the highest level. So how many of you in school were taught, and this is still taught in school, that the primaries are yellow, blue, and red? Raise your hand if, yep. No, they are not. Not true, wrong. Get that out of your brain. Primary colors are the source of all other colors. You cannot mix a primary color from any other colors. So cyan, magenta, and yellow are the primary colors, the 3 primaries. You can't mix a cyan, you can't mix a magenta, you can't mix a yellow, all these bright, clear colors. So that's really important to kind of step back and realize that, because you can mix a red from magenta and yellow. You can mix beautiful red. You can mix green from cyan and yellow. You can mix a beautiful purple from magenta and cyan and so on. But you can't create those colors. So what are secondary colors? So we'll talk about that, and we're going to practice these. The secondary colors, so the primaries on that little chart are marked 1s, number 1. The number 2s are the secondary colors. So when we talk about secondary, literally, they're the ones that when you mix a primary and a primary, you get a secondary. So cyan, magenta is purple. Cyan, yellow is green. And magenta, yellow is orange. Those are in relatively equivalent amounts, and that's what you'll get, the primary. And then the tertiaries are variations of secondary colors with more or less of each primary. So literally, red is mostly magenta with a little bit of yellow. So you can get reddish purples or really bluey purples, really pretty blue greens, and we'll be practicing these and so on. So that's really just it. And then the final thing, which is really cool, and we'll be doing this, if you mix cyan, magenta, and yellow, you get beautiful brown. It's really lovely. And then mixing, we'll also be practicing mixing black, which I use my two favorite extra colors, which are actually not on this chart, but they are burnt sienna and indanthrone blue, a dark blue. And I like those because I can create that black really quickly, but you can also create black with the blue and a red. So, or blue and a magenta, but it's a little harder. So we'll be going into that a bit further on. So the next thing that I think it's important to understand are watercolor characteristics and why we say certain ones are maybe easier to work with, and what they do and why. So let's quickly take a look. Here's a listing from Daniel Smith. When you buy watercolor, your watercolors come with these labels. So SKU that's a stock number, so don't worry about that. But pigment, the PY40, is the actual name of the pigment. That I'll talk about that in a second. That is, it's like a genus and species. Those of you who know natural history, that is the code that means that is that yellow, chrome yellow, or aureolin yellow. And then they'll tell you what the light fastness is. That is how well that pigment will withstand exposure in sunlight. So if you're doing studio work, really light, fast colors is important. There are colors that are called fugitive, and this yellow used to be much more fugitive, but they've worked on the formulas and it's much better now. So you'll look for a really good light fast. In nature journals, it's not quite as important because it's not exposed to, it's not hanging on a wall. You haven't sold your painting for $10,000 to someone and have the colors disappear. Transparency, we'll talk about. Staining and granulation are the other characteristics of watercolor we're going to look at. But looking at that PY40, that's important because different paint manufacturers will, like Winsor and Newton, will call their yellow something completely different, but it's PY40. So you can buy the same pigment, but it's called something different. So, it's like here in the Southwest, there's a flower called tuberosa, and there's like 5 different plants that could be. It's just like this. So you go with the PY40, that's the genus and species, if you want to look for that particular color. So let's look at these other characteristics. And these are going to be important for creating different effects in your watercolor work. So one of the top ones, non-granulating versus granulating. And that's also known as flocculating. It's a great word. Or sedimentary color. And literally, that word helps, sedimentary. It has a lot of texture. So the burnt sienna at the bottom is called a really granulating color. Another color that's really famously granulating and a lot of people love it is ultramarine blue, which has loads of beautiful texture. Non-granulating, like the one at the top and the first few on those rows, they're just really smooth, really clear, not textured. And the reason texture, so if you chose a textured color like ultramarine blue, which is a beautiful blue, when you mix it with, say, also burnt sienna or a little bit of magenta, it makes gorgeous clouds because it gets all textured and beautiful. So a lot of people keep a little bit of ultramarine blue in their palette just for clouds, just as an example. Then there's transparent versus opaque. Transparent, literally, say you want to cover something, it shows through. You can see whatever's under it. So it's very bright. So that even the brightness of the paper shows through, where the opaque colors like the yellow under I think that's cadmium yellow, is much more, will actually cover over other things. So literally it's not as see-through. It's duller, if that's a word I might use. It's denser looking. And then here's one of my favorite things to remind people too. And this is important because if you're just starting out, it can be really hard if you accidentally buy a bunch of staining colors, because it's literally the paint, the pigment when it goes on the paper, it stays there. It's not moving. It can't be lifted off. It can't be re-wet. And you'll see that where right down the middle, I was using a tissue. I would put it on wet and then take a tissue and dab it immediately after painting. And you can see which ones just lifted off right away and which ones are like bonk. The staining one there that I'm showing is phthalo blue, and that's spelled PHTH, I think, ALO. I'll have that up in just a minute. The phthalo colors, there's a number of them, are extremely staining. And that's good for some things. But if you're just beginning, I really like lifting colors, because if you make a mistake or you really don't like it, if you move quickly, you can blot it up with a tissue or re-wet it and suck it off and literally like wipe it off with your finger. So for beginners, I really like it because it's very forgiving. And then another characteristic you'll want to pay attention to, we'll be talking about this, is cool colors versus warm colors. And in here, that shows the cools. Those two blues there are called cool blues. The dark blue is what's called a warm blue. I'm going to show you a spectrum in a minute so you'll understand that. And then that burnt sienna is a warm red. So on the color wheel, true color wheel here, there are cool colors and warm colors. And the cool colors tend to be in the blues, and they call them passive colors. And I'll show you why in just a minute. They tend to recede back and not grab your attention, and they're great for moods. Or warm and active colors. So the warmer colors, the yellows, oranges, magentas, reds, they pop, they come forward, and they attract your eye. That's why they're called active. So an example in this little landscape-ito I did of this riverscape or lakescape is the color in the background of those dark hills is the cool receding colors, the blues. I knocked that in the back with some dull blue. When I wanted the things to look closer, I made sure that the greens, I had different colored greens, the ones that are darker and cooler toward the back, and then brighter and warmer toward the front. And that gives a little depth in that little landscape-ito. Really quick and easy to do, a good trick to know. But that's why people talk about warm and cool. That said, let's look at what these colors are briefly. These are the colors on this little strip sheet here. Cobalt yellow, PY40, we talked about, is what's called a neutral yellow. It's really not very warm and it's not really cool. So it's kind of right in the middle. And that's why I like it so much. Cadmium yellow is really warm. It's a medium yellow. It's a pretty dense color. Manganese blue is a cool blue, PB15. You'll notice phthalo blue, a cool blue, that staining blue. It's also a PB15, but it has a second number. So it has something else in it that's changing that PB15 just a little bit, but it's closely related. And then a blue has a dual number. It's a mixed blue. So it's PB60 and PBK, which is black, 6. So it's actually closer to the indigo families, and it's a warm blue. And then quinacridone rose, a cool magenta color, and then burnt sienna. So my favorite triad, the primary triad, which literally means 3, are transparent colors because, and I'll explain why in just a second. They're lifting, easily lift off the page mostly, and mostly cool colors, although that yellow is neutral. So not a warm yellow in my favorite triad, plus the warm blue and the burnt sienna. So that's my yellow is the cobalt yellow. The blue is a manganese blue. The magenta is quinacridone rose. My warm blue is indanthrone blue. And then my other extra is burnt sienna. And why? Why did I choose that? Because those will give me the brightest possible, beautiful, clear colors. They create a harmony when you mix them. You're not adding a bunch of complicated other warm colors, and you can do that, but it takes a lot of experience. So I'm talking about beginners here. I really recommend starting out this way until you become fluent in a primary language. And then there's for that very reason, there's less chance you're gonna mess up and create what like a dull, yucky color or muddy, blushy colors. More often than not, I'll have people in classes say, you know, oh, I've tried watercolor, I hate it. Doesn't work for me. And I'll say, well, can I see your watercolor? And they'll inevitably pull out like student grade watercolors or just a little thing they got at Michael's or whatever. And the reason they can't mix any colors is because they've got lots of different pigments in there that are not harmonious, and they can't be mixed to create colors properly. And then I choose the lifting because I said that there's more leeway for beginners. Being able to quickly pull colors back off or create clouds, like you take your cyan and you put a nice wet cyan across where your sky is, and then you take your Kleenex and you ball it up and you bink, 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 and you have instant clouds that you can go in later and add some shadow to, and boom, it's really nice. And lots of other things you can do with lifting colors. So that's why I chose those characteristics. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to start demonstrating colors, and we're going to go through and slowly go around the color wheel, and we're going to mix colors. All of you have the PDF that I sent out. There'll be two things that we're going to do. We're going to do the color wheel that I've been showing you, going around with the primaries and making your secondaries and tertiaries. Then we're going to do the burnt sienna, warm blue, to learn to mix grays and black. Then we're going to have a little fun. I developed this over the last few weeks because there's a great, and you have this guide in the PDF as well. But after we get comfortable making our primaries and secondaries, we are going to practice adding opposite colors and warm blue to create more muted colors, and why we want to do that. And then from there, that's when we'll go and start sketching some leaves and rocks and things to practice how you put this to action. And it becomes pretty intuitive pretty quickly with this simple system, because you've only got 5 things to worry about, not 12, 18, 24 colors in your palette where you're going, which one do I use? And you pick the wrong ones, and suddenly you've wrecked your beautiful sketch you just did of a lovely landscape because you accidentally picked the wrong colors and it went all muddy, yucky. So what we're going to do is also, I'll demonstrate important techniques, and you've probably heard this, putting wet color onto another color that still hasn't dried in your notebook. So that's called wet and wet. Then the next is you'll add another color on top of a dry color. That's called glazing, and why and how that works. We'll add depth quickly with the darks. Glazing for variegated colors. I'm a big fan of using multiple shades of colors, like especially on leaves, to get that natural look, because it very rarely is something one color in nature. And then mixing grays and blacks and mixing red. just to recap a couple of tips, watercolor is water plus color, and you can control it. Use water as a tool. More water is a lighter color, less water, deep, rich colors. Use your fingers if you need to. Don't lick them though. I had a question. I know one of you had asked me about toxicity of paints, and that's a good thing to remember. Assume all your paints are toxic. They have chromium in them. They've got all sorts of chemicals, the phthalos, the quinacridones. Those are all serious chemicals. And so don't lick your brushes. And don't dispose of your wastewater in the environment. Don't dump it on the ground. Carry an old plastic jar with you in your bag. Dump it in there and then put it down the drain where its wastewater treatment takes care of it. That's important. And also, big tip, a lot of you see this all over the internet. And it's true, right? It's on the internet. People think natural watercolors are safe. Burnt sienna, it's dirt, right? It's perfectly safe. Or azurite. No. Yeah, it may be natural, but it's got copper in it. Copper is a volatile, dangerous thing to ingest or get absorbed too much of. So be careful. Just assume that your paints are all toxic. It's a really good idea. Have fun. Experiment and don't be afraid. I know that's that's the hardest thing. And there's only one rule though. And this is the rule I break all the time. You gotta remember to stop. I tend to go over and over things until I've just ruined it. A quick and very confident application of color without doing too much to it later. And I can demonstrate how to kill something really well. That's really the key for watercolor, because watercolor, when it's, look at these colors on this example here. Those are beautiful, bright, rich colors. If I were to go in after that cyan was down there, or let's look at that purple, that's a mixed color. If I were to go in there and try to do some more to that, I'm going to make it really ugly. You just got to go with what you have. I'll show you how you can do a little bit of glazing and adding things, but if you do too much, you will wreck it. So I'm going to stop the share here. Okay. And let's take questions now. Grace, what have we got?
There weren't any questions in chat.
No questions come out. Anyone, you want to just unmute and ask questions? Or are we all ready to play paint? They're all ready to play paint. Okay, I'm going to swap over then to my document camera overhead. And okay, what we're going to do first, we're not going to play with the plants first. So what we're going to do, everybody got your paints out. Now, if you're new to this, hopefully you've got a little spray bottle. If you're using paints in pans that are dried, and if anyone has a question, just send that to Grace. She'll interrupt me. So I'm literally refreshing my paints with a little spray bottle. It kind of wakes them up. Those of you who've got the little spray bottles, they are kind of hard to open, but you grab them here and just kind of flick it like that, and it'll open to fill it. So what we're going to do, start out putting we'll paint a cyan, a magenta, and a yellow here. So let's just start out with that. I'm just moving left to right. So just do that. If you want to draw circles, that's fine to give yourself a guideline. So like your cyan, say that didn't work, it was all warbly. I apparently have a hard time drawing and talking at the same time. But that'll do there. So let's do that. Get our pure cyan, almost pure color there. Just a tiny bit of, not a lot of water. And same with the yellow. If you've noticed here, I have two yellows. One I use for mixing, so it gets all gnarly, and the other stays pretty virgin. And I'm going pretty much pure paint on the paper here. My brush is damp, but not super wet. I'm rinsing it up in between and swishing it, drying it a little bit on a towel. And then, oops, I put mine in the wrong place. I better do that over so I don't confuse you guys. Talking and painting at the same time is dangerous. So hopefully you noticed that I did that wrong. There's the cyan. Magenta is the next one. This is just so we're all doing this in the same order. You don't have to do it this way, but it's just the way this particular wheel is set up and it works well. So there's the yellow. Now how are we doing? Am I too far ahead of you guys? Grace, what have we got? Have everybody let us know if we're ready for mixing secondaries. Are we ready?
I think so.
Okay. So let's do purple, which is, so this is your secondary, which is cyan and magenta. So I've already got some cyan here. I'm going to add a little bit more. And then dip right into my magenta. Pretty much almost equal amounts. Look at that, beautiful. So make a slightly smaller circle so you have enough room to do a tertiary between each one. Lovely. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean this palette because I kind of made that a little exuberant. So I'm just wiping it off over here. Normally, unless I'm doing a really big, larger landscape or something, I don't need a whole lot of paint. So the next one we should do is orange, which is yellow and magenta. So I'm going to get the yellow first. I did not quite as much this time. And now I'm just going to get a little magenta. Maybe a tiny bit more. Mix it pretty well for these. You want to, more I mix it, the better it looks. For doing a good solid orange. And other times you might want to not mix something as well if you want a really pretty marbly look to it. So yeah, that looks like a really nice bright orange. And then I'm going to mix a green right here. I'm going to go ahead and use my mixing yellow there. And just touch in a little, this cyan is really, really rich. So it didn't take a whole lot to create that green. Look at that. Beautiful, bright, gorgeous green. Look at those colors. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, I'm gonna let people catch up there. See if I'm gonna turn the gallery on. So maybe I can see more. Okay, good. How are we doing? Okay, let's do a check-in. How are people doing with their colors? How do you feel about them? Go ahead and, unmute, talk to us. Do we have successes? Do we have, oh my God? Do we have, I don't want to talk about it? No.
I don't have to do this.
Sheila, yeah.
I'm using that water brush because
Yes.
I didn't have time to get all my stuff together. And I think I'm putting too much water in there.
Yes.
Okay.
Water brushes are really hard to control, the water flow. It takes some practice. So try, do you have a paper towel or something you can just have to hand and keep,
I'm using this thing that,
yeah,
okay.
keep removing as much water as you can. Maybe a paper towel even dedicated just to that.
Okay.
It is,
mine seem to be more washed out than your colors.
yeah,
Some of them. So
that can tend to happen with the water brushes because you just can't tell how much is coming out.
okay.
You can obviously master it. It just takes some time. Jack Laws, that's all he's ever used, and he does gorgeous work. I use a water brush sometimes, but I do have trouble controlling the flow still.
Good, thank you.
Sure. Any other check-ins? Jan, how are you doing?
I'm having a problem with the
Okay.
orange. It looks
Yeah.
more pink to me.
Maybe a little bit too much magenta, then I would keep adding a little bit more yellow till you bring that back up.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part, is learning how much to add of each to get the desired result.
I agree.
Yes. And that's something you'll want to just practice, especially with your secondaries, just so you get to know the characteristics of the paints that you're using. So mix those until you're really confident. I can do that orange, or that if you want a slightly yellower orange, then you would add more yellow or not quite as much magenta when you're starting out. And you'll get to know whichever magenta you've chosen, how it behaves with each color. Like my cyan is super, super rich and strong. And I don't need very much at all to change or alter colors or to create these. It's like a super, yeah, it's a super color. And it's taken me a while to get used to the green leaf blueberry cyan, which I'm playing with right now.
Does it matter which color you try for first, the lighter, and then add the darker?
I tend to start with the lighter one and add the dark. So to create the orange, I think it's easier to put my yellow down and then dip in the cyan to get the greens, or the magenta to get the orange. Otherwise, you do have to sometimes go back and forth and add more. You saw it took me several tries to get my orange down. It's not quite as bright as I have done in the past, but it's fine. Okay, shall we? No, the next thing
we had a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Brianna asked, how do you get pigment out of a water brush?
You mean it's still stuck on your brush part?
Yeah. It's not.
Okay. Yeah. You might need to, when you're, so if you've got your rag, take your water brush, squeeze some water onto it away from your paper, and then dig it into the, literally, here, let me just pull mine up. I'll pull my water brush out and show you. So here's my water brush. Let me move this window here. Get a scrap paper here. All right, so I'm squeezing water there, and I'm going to get some paint. I'll get some of the cyan. And so here's some cyan. So I'm going to do some more yellow. I'm going to make a brighter yellow and put that in here. And now I need to clean this off. And what I do, here's my little rag, squeeze some water and dab, dab, dab. Do this around and around. Squeeze a little water until it's clear of pigment. So that's how you do that to clean your water brush between. Any other, is that, Brianna, do you think that helps?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just keep practicing on that. Water brushes are great for in the field because you don't have to mess around with all the crazy, water things that can tip over and stuff, but they take a little bit of getting used to. Let's do the brown. Oh, absolutely.
I don't know
Shoot.
if this is a time or not, but if I am doing a landscape out in the field and I've mixed just exactly the colors I want, and then I run out of them, how do I know how to go back and get those same colors? Is it just?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that comes with time and just your experience. And one of the great things about using just the triad is you will know what it is you used. It's right there. It's not like you were dabbing. You have, I've seen people with 24 colors or so, and say you're just kind of messing around and you get the perfect color, and then 20 minutes later you're like, oops, I don't remember what I used. Because none of us are. I want to emphasize, let's remember, we're naturalists. We are field recording information. We're getting colors down. We want to do beautiful images in our notebooks, but we're not professional studio artists. So, make it as easy and simple for yourself as possible so you can enjoy nature and observing and not get so bogged down in color theory that you're just driving yourself crazy. So that's kind of, you'll get used to that. But it's fairly quickly, like if I really like this bright green and I use it all up, I can pretty quickly get back to that because there's only a couple of things to make green. So I think it'll come quickly for you.
Okay, thank you.
And
If you've got-
Roseanne,
Yeah.
the other thing to do is, if you're doing your colors, is just to make a little color thing on your paper in the notebook.
Yes.
That tells
You mean
you,
like a little cheat sheet?
Yeah, that tells you these are the 3 colors I'm using, or these are 2 I combined, and just so that when you go back, you know what you used.
Yeah, so really early days, like I think this was the first month I was doing watercolor, and this was back when I was trying to do too much color theory. Like I was, I had warm reds and dark blues and everything, but this little cheat sheet lived in the front of my notebook, so I knew what the colors were. This is before I just said, I'm not going to carry 18 colors with me. It's just too much. in addition to juggling all that stuff, I'm also not getting any younger. I don't want to carry all that weight because I like to walk and hike and move around, and you know, my shoulder gets tired or I get pooped out. So a cheat sheet's a great idea, Judy, so that you know what the different proportions are. Okay, so let's see how we make that brown in the middle, because if we mix our cyan, our magenta, and our yellow, I know this seems completely like bonkers how you get that beautiful brown, but let's take a look. This palette right now has yellow, magenta, and cyan in it. I'm going to add some more, and I'm going to go ahead and use the water brush. So I've made a green, now I'm adding more magenta, and you can see what that does is really darkening it up. And then the yellow, now that's more too greeny, so I'm going to keep adding more magenta till I'm getting, there it is. Look at that brown. And I've got to mix it up pretty well. If I want it to be a little bit richer, I can add a little bit more of the magenta, a little more yellow. We'll lighten it a little bit. There you go. That's brown, which is pretty cool, isn't it? And if if I wanted that to be, I just added some blue, some of the cyan. You see how that changed the nature of that brown a little bit? If I add more yellow, I'm going to get almost like a sepia, like that. So that's how we play with the different proportions to get the different browns, which is pretty fun. All right, so I have to clean off this palette because we're going to now work on around the color wheel to get our tertiaries. And for cleaning out your palette lids, if your lids over time get a little stained, this one's getting stained a little bit with the cyan, which is a pretty strong color. Get those magic erasers. I can't remember what the brand is. They're called Magic Eraser. They work great to clean off your palette.
The Stetler Mars?
No, just from Ace Hardware or your grocery store.
Mr. Clean.
Mr. Clean.
Thank you. Yeah. I just keep a little 1-inch square one. All right, so let's work. Wow, I almost dipped my brush into my tea. That would have killed it. How many people here who've done watercolor have dipped your brushes in your wine glass? That's a sad, sad thing right there. Oh, okay. So doing a tertiary between our purples here, what I'm going to do is start. I better move my tea, or I am going to dip it in. So I'm going to start with cyan here and get my purple. That's pretty close to that now. A little bit more magenta-y. Okay, now if I want a more blue purple, just add more of the cyan. So this is almost a royal blue right here. Like that. And now let's pull it let's pull it toward the magenta, which is going to be more like a lilac. Actually, that's still pretty close to the mid one, so I'm going to add just a little bit more. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put it out here, because if I add this to this, it's just not going to be as clear and pretty. In fact, let me just show you. I'm just kind of messing with it here. I'm moving too much of the pigment particles around on the paper, and watercolor doesn't like that. If you move it around a lot, it does tend to break its relationship with the paper. Watercolor, you want to be able to have that brightness come through. So it's better to lay down something first. You can fix it later by letting it dry and maybe glazing on top of it, and we'll do that in a minute. But I'm going to work around, everybody just keep working around the wheel, doing your tertiaries. I'm going to do my, I'm just going to go clockwise. Right now I'm working on red. Which is mostly magenta with just a little bit of yellow there. I think that's really close. That's kind of a nice, there we go. I think that shows nicely as red. And now I want to pull it back with more yellow. So it's just a really pale peachy color. Look at that, so that's really pretty. Maybe even more yellow. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah. And I think I need to clean this off. When you're working on your watercolors in your journal, say you're working on a plant, you would tend to work in certain color families first and until you're done. So you start maybe with the lighter yellows, greens, lighter greens, do those first. Then if there are other colors, work on that so that you're working in your palette. You use all the greens you need to, then you can wipe them clean. Then you move on to whatever other colors you might need for your little sketch. That's a really good strategy for that. So here I'm going to create a blue-green that's almost a turquoise by dropping in just a little blue at a time. See if I can't get a turquoisey blue. I could have done it the other way and started with the blue and added yellow. A little bit more. That's a lot of color too. So that's more of a turquoise blue, a turquoisey green, I should say. And then we want a bright. I'm going to clean that. Notice how I see my gnarly yellow. I'm going to clean it off a little. It got pretty gross. And you do that just by putting a clean brush in, swirling it around. Now I can grab some. So let's make like a Palo Verde tree green. There. So how's everybody doing with their tertiaries? They're a little more challenging. Just think of this wheel like a dial. So if you want your yellow to be like a bright, almost yellow. Those of you from the desert Southwest, we have a tree called a Palo Verde tree, which is this yellowy green. So you think of it as a dial. You're just going to add more yellow. You're going to lean toward that color you're wanting it to shift toward. Any comments so far?
Sheila asked, what do you use for your palette lid?
This is, I have these especially made for me. It's a waterproof, custom made label, but you can buy from Office Supply or Amazon, look for Avery labels, you know, the Avery company, and look for their labels for scientific, they're waterproof permanent labels for the scientific community. So just look for laboratory labels. And then it's great white. That's basically what this is. So it's waterproof, really durable, and wipes clean. So that works really well. Yeah, I think it's like $8 or $10 for a box, so you'll have labels for the rest of your life. All right, moving kind of on a little bit, what I'd like to do is now introduce the burnt sienna in dark blue and practice doing our blacks and grays. And then from there, we're going to take the dark blue and see what it looks like when you add a dark blue to each primary, to see what that does to those blues, or excuse me, to those colors. Then what we're going to do is experimenting with, so taking this bright purple and muting it. So let's say we need to make a plum, then we're going to add either its opposite color or dark blue. So we'll do that after, but for now, let's practice black, because that's magic. This is like alchemist stuff. It's really cool. We take the burnt sienna and plenty of the dark blue. And start mixing it. And that's not enough pigment. This is kind of what will wash, it's wishy-washy. I just added more blue. That's getting better. I'm going to add a little bit more blue. Now that's still a very blue black, which can be a really cool color for shadows. But right now I want to do a black, black, black. So I'm going to add a little bit more of the burnt sienna. Now, to get really good black, you got to mix it well. A little bit more blue, because it's still looking not quite deep enough for me. There we go. And that's making a really cool black. So why would you want to mix black instead of just like buying lamp black, for example? Well, these blacks are beautiful on in your notebook because they have character. It's built from two of your main colors that you're using. It's very harmonious. So look at that, makes an absolute black. So to turn that into gray is quite simply both a lighter, I just dilute it, or if I wanted, say, a blue gray, I add a little bit more blue, like a steel gray, like that. So you see all the ranges you can get. Or if I bring up a little warmer, I get like a warm gray. So here we are on the spectrum. Here's your burnt sienna, which is a lovely color. Great for making dirt and rocks. And then here is your dark blue, which what I wanted to demonstrate for you for sure, if I use my dark blue, 100% pure pigment, like almost no water, like it's practically a black. So you can use this as a shadow color instantly right out of the pot. And it has a lot of beauty to it, rather than flat black. These are the hardest ones to mix, for sure. I'm going to pause there and let everybody practice those, because those are really good to do well. And shout out any questions. You'll when you're painting something in your notebooks, you do your darks last. It's just easier. Occasionally there's an exception, but it's kind of the last thing you'll do. Darks are really important for your sketches, but you can also overdo them.
So Sheila asked a question in chat. Basic question. Do you wipe off your brush before putting into each color? Because mine are getting icky.
Good question. As you saw, I'll just demonstrate again. When I'm doing my blacks, no, I dip right in. I'll see how I just went ahead and it does mess them up. But when I'm done and I get the color that I want, I can go in, I just clean my brush off. So now I have a clean brush and I clean off the top of my burnt sienna and it's good to go. Does that make sense?
Can I ask also, how much water do you have on your brush? I think I have too much water.
Yeah, that's
when I
usually
dip it in.
that's a common challenge when you're just beginning, is too much water, because all of a sudden you'll just have to keep adding pigment until you've just got a huge amount. Like maybe you need like tiny little bit of black, but you end up with black. Yeah. So let me demonstrate again. My brush. Okay, I'm cleaning it off. I'm actually using my fingers. I'm using a big pot here since I'm doing so much demos. Normally I just use a tiny little pot, but I'm literally squeegeeing it out with my fingers here. Okay, so it's pretty, it's not super wet. And I'm going to start with my dark blue, almost pure there. It's really thick. And I'm going to go right in and do the same with the burnt sienna. And see, I got there faster with less water. See how quickly that became black? If I had lots of water, it's going to be really more gray.
Yeah, and that's all I could
And
get.
so then I have to add more pigment and more pigment.
Okay, great.
And next thing you know, I need to paint a night sky because I've got so much black on my palette.
Thanks.
Now I'm going to move on to a couple other things because I want us to get through this and then I want time to do some demos, actual paint something demos. So couple of quick tips. So say you want to do, it's winter, there's grassland and you want to do a lovely grassland field. How do you create a grassland, a dried grass color with a bright yellow? Because if I put this bright yellow down, it's going to look dumb. It'll look like a spring field of sunflowers instead of dried grass, dull. So with my yellow, if I dip in, I'm going to add a little bit of the burnt sienna. First, I'm going to clean it off though, because I'd been demonstrating the black. So I would have messed that up a little bit. So I'm just going to dip in a tiny bit of burnt sienna. I still want it to be yellowy. I might even add a little bit more yellow. And it makes a really nice, kind of like if I were doing grasses or, I just need a nice beige color. So that's one little quick tip. And using the same burnt sienna, you can tone your burnt sienna down. Oops, wow, that was nice and soupy. I'm going to add a little bit of magenta to create a really pretty kind of adobe rose color. And because, see the granulation? I made that a little bigger. That's the granulation. So that's a really pretty color. Suddenly we've got some really neat earth tones to work with here. So these are just quick tips for how you can use your burnt sienna and your indanthrone, your dark blue, to enhance these colors. Like pure indanthrone, you can use that as a black if you put it in strong enough. That's just pure, there's nothing else. It's a beautiful color. It makes a lovely, lovely dark shadow right away, and we'll practice that with our leaves. Something else I wanted to, so I'm going to jump over to this other color practice sheet. If you all have, wiping off my palette here, if you have your other sheet, this one. So here's where I was talking about, here's your burnt sienna. If you add a little with yellow with a tiny bit of burnt sienna, how that's that grassy color, a little bit of magenta to the burnt sienna, you get this lovely kind of adobe rose, I call it. Then what I want to introduce to you, you've got your primaries and your secondaries here. We've all been practicing those. So there's your green. This is a photocopy, so these colors are not as pure. This is just a office paper. If we take the bright green and we add, let's do two things. Let's first mix a bright green. I'm going to demonstrate how we mute our colors when we want different shades of a bright color, because you're going to want that. So I'm going to be sketching a eucalyptus leaf, which is very dull blue green. So I'm going to want to knock it back. How do I do that? So if we start with a bright green, so mix yourself a bright green with cyan and yellow. Let's do a bright green. nice like primary, or excuse me, secondary bright green, like bing, like new leaf green. Okay. Once you've got that, we're going to do two things with it. So you're going to sort of divide that in half. First, I'm going to add some warm blue, this outer circle, the indanthrone here, to this and see what happens. This is one way to change your color. Go ahead and paint that out there like that. Look at what happened. It's more like an evergreen blue now, an evergreen green, you know, like a pine needle green. Everyone try that? Okay. Now taking the same secondary green, I'm going to do something else. Another way to quickly mute this green is to add what's called its opposite color, which is magenta. You see that? It's across the color wheel. So I'm going to take that bright green and I'm going to drop in a little bit, not a lot, just going to start small, a little bit of the red and watch what happens. We get another type of muted green. I didn't have a lot of paint there, so made it small. So there are several ways, working from your bright color, that you can create different shades of green really, really quickly using its opposite color or a warm blue. And you can do that working all the way around the color wheel here. The outermost ring on this wheel that I created, or this star, let's call it the star. So the outermost tips of the star are the colors that you get by adding warm blue to that color there. So magenta plus a warm blue creates this plum color. The bright purple, if you add its opposite color, which is yellow, you get this muted purple. If you add a warm blue, you get a different hue entirely, and so on. If you add warm blue to cyan, you get this lovely kind of, gosh, it's a kind of a Windsor blue kind of thing, or Delft blue. You know, it's like the really cool blues that they paint federal buildings with, or Federalist buildings, the old, almost, it's a very rich, deep blue. So does that make sense, how this works? It gives you a really broad range of colors at your fingertips by quickly working around this wheel. So you'll probably want to create your own cheat sheet like this, and keep it in the front of your notebook so you can quickly remember, hey, I can get this color family of this really cool muted orange by adding cyan to this orange. Or if I want a really quick plummy color, I take magenta and drop in the warm blue. Does that make sense? Because I want to get to doing some actual life sketching so you can see how this works in reality. Any questions? Okay. I think what we'll do next then I do want to, one thing I did forget to do is show you really quickly if you haven't already figured it out on your own, the idea of lifting colors. So if I'm painting and I'm doing my yellow and I accidentally blork out here, I can quickly go in and lift that yellow off. Or, so that's why I like it for beginners or working in the field, because it's very forgiving. You know, if it's windy and you blork something accidentally, or it spills, you can repair it quickly. So if I do this sky and I ball up the tissue here, that's just pure cyan. I can quickly create clouds by pulling out the color. And then if I had create a little gray here. A really wet brush. Oops, that's too dark. It's not wet enough. I can quickly add some shadows and create puffy clouds. That's kind of advanced stuff, but that's why we like the lifting colors. There's a lot you can do with that. But I got some puffy fun clouds really quickly there. So that was demonstrating the lifting part. So let's look at a couple of real life things. So this is a simple leaf from my tangerine tree. And it's very, very dark on the inside and very bright, two different color greens very clearly. So what I'm going to show you real quickly is how we can quickly paint that. Let's see. I'm going to do a really quick and dirty sketch here, because I don't want to spend a ton of time on that part. And feel free to just watch, or if you want to play as well. I'm not going for super accuracy here because I want to get straight to painting. Okay. Okay. I'm trying to make the lines a little bigger because, or heavier, because it wasn't showing up really well. But that's one way to do that. While that's drying, that ink, let me show you. Who remembered to get their wax paper? Okay, and hopefully you remember to mark the top. I used to write, like one time I was not real thinking and I just wrote T for top, but then that didn't work because T looks the same on either side. So let's pretend, I'm going to use pencil here. Let's pretend we've got a leaf that has white veins. This one does not have white veins, but I want to paint those white veins, but how do you paint white veins? Well, you don't. Here's a little tip. Put your wax paper over and trace over whatever it is you don't want the paint to go on. So I don't want the paint to go down the center vein. I'm pretending here. This is a pretend leaf. And I don't want it to go down the veins. This is a dull pencil, and I scribed that way. Here's another fun tip. This is just kind of fun extra stuff. Let's say I want to do like a bird track. I can literally draw the track of the bird. Animal track. But you can't see it. So right now I'm still waiting for that to dry. Check this out though. Very fun. I'm going to create some kind of dirt color. The little animal track shows right up. And I'm going to go ahead and prepare my first paint. So I want this bright green color here. I'm going to go ahead and create that bright green color using yellow and cyan. It's got a little bit more yellow in it. It's a yellowier green. So I'm going to go with this yellowier, lighter color. I'm going to paint it on here so you can see how reserving those veins. This is a quick and fun way to paint a leaf or anything that you want to reserve the veins. Now, this is a bright green. I'm going to show you some wet on wet. I'm going to add a darker green with maybe a little bit of the warm blue in there while this is still damp. And I'm not going to cover it 100%. I'm going to leave it kind of mixed and marbly. So the colors get a little bit richer. But that's just a really fun way. Now, I'm going to let this dry and paint the bright green since this has had time. To dry, and so my ink was not going to run. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate shadow for you, there's two ways to do this. See what happens if I paint this all the same color green. Let me decrease that exposure there. This just looks like a single flat leaf that's got a vein running down the middle because I painted it all one green color. But to get this shadow and variability in here, what I want to do is get some dark in here. And there's two ways to do it. I could do it by adding the indanthrone right now while it's still damp. But I don't think I'm going to do that. And the reason is it'll bleed up into this bright green. And I'm going to show you so you'll understand what bleeding is. So I'm going to wreck this by putting paint right here. This is called wet and wet. And when you drop a wet paint onto a wet paint, it moves like through the pigment follows the water. So I've just kind of wrecked that because we want a hard edge there. So I'm going to go in and fix it by pulling, like dabbing that color out because I can repaint that. So I'm going to let that dry. But here, I could demonstrate adding a shadow underneath this leaf to give it some definition. I can either use pure indanthrone, or I could have mixed black. But I kind of like the dark blue. It's a really pretty look. It creates an instant shadow that's kind of sitting up off the paper now. Kind of fun. Let's say I wanted, this is dry now. Let's say I wanted this to have more yellow green. We can do what's called wet on dry. I'm going to mix just some yellow. And this is glazing because this is dry, and I'm putting wet paint over it. It's going to give this leaf a completely different look. And I really like it. It creates a variability, that variegation that's quite lovely. You see how that suddenly looks quite a bit richer and prettier? So this is dry enough probably to play with here. I'm going to just take the dark blue, just the dark blue, and paint that over to get an enhanced dark green. When it dries, it's going to be more green than blue. And now that suddenly got a different form look to it. And if I create a little black or dark blue, oops, see, I used too much. While this is still damp in here, I can create that shadow. And then it doesn't have that really hard edge. So suddenly that looks like a leaf that's curled instead of a flat leaf that was pointing that way. This is still a bit bright, so what I'll do is add, I'm going to do that yellow glazing trick like we just talked about. I'm just painting pure yellow on top to give it a little bit brighter. Brighter, more yellowy, greeny, more interesting. And that should dry a little darker than that. So that was just really quick demo of how you use those darks to create different shades, different depth, a shadow, how we did a wet paint into a wet paint to get this soft edge. We saw what happened when I accidentally let it bleed. And then we saw what happened when you put a wet color over dry. That's called glazing. And it works with lots of different colors, of course, not just yellow. You can glaze a magenta over. What do you think would happen if I glazed a magenta over this? Any guesses? So if we look back at this, and we have a green and we add a magenta, it's going to dull that into a muted green. I probably wouldn't do that because I've already got yellow and some other colors in here that, but let's try it just to see, just for argument's sake. we want to get comfortable with these rules of, well, I don't like to call them rules, characteristics of watercolor. So create a little magenta wash. So I think it's dry enough. Suddenly it's more like a fall color leaf. Dulls it right down, browns it up a little bit, warms it up because it's mixing with its opposite color to create a muted color. Isn't that beautiful? So you see what power is at your fingertips that we just created with these very simple colors. You can use the wax paper tip on anything. Like if we wanted to, reserve, let's say I'm drawing this coral bean, which I'm going to draw in pencil because I don't want to wait for it to dry. Okay, so I want to paint that, but let's say I'm nervous and I want to be sure to reserve that bright spot. Oops, because you don't want to fill this in 100% red. I'm going to show you both. Whoa. I'm going to do two. That one's a little wonky, but that's okay. Let's say I want to reserve a little bit of that shine. See, I just scribed that in a little bit. Hope I didn't do too much. Now I'm going to create a red. Ooh, now that was a good example of too much water. Did you guys see that? Yeah, I put too much water down. Would have taken me forever to create the color. So there's the magenta. I'm going to have to go into this one because the other one is completely gnarly. How does that look? And it's okay to do test swatches to see if you like. I think I like that color. Okay, so if I just paint this all one color, it's just going to be flat. There's no definition. I need a little more. I don't have enough paint here. Ah, I've got my beautiful virgin yellow all gross. But by reserving that, I've got a shine spot built in. Oops. And then one tip you want to use, oops, I'm going to read, let's see, yeah. And then we can work with this to darken up the edges by adding, what do we want to add? Let's look at our cheat sheet again. I would really like I think I want to kind of go up here and put a warm blue in there so I get a purpley shadow. So I'm going to add the warm blue to create a purpley shadow to give this some depth around the base. Just, you know, to give it shape. I'm dropping it in wet so that it's not a hard edge. And that's going to start to look more and more like a beam. So we're moving toward the end of our 2 hours. Oh my. Let me take some questions. And then what I want to do is walk you through the last bit of tips, and then we can end with final questions. So any questions right now about this particular section?
So there were several questions in chat about what type of pen you're using.
Oh, let's cover that at the end. Since this is a
Okay.
class about watercolor, I want to keep it on there, and then we'll talk about different waterproof inks and things like that at the end. And I can talk about what kind of, this is a fountain pen with a cartridge, a refillable ink cartridge. And I'll talk about that at the end. So Grace, if you could remind me. More questions? Was that it then?
There was another question of, can you use wax paper to make your highlights?
Yes, that's what I did on here. So I scored these with wax before I painted them. If you can also do, let's say I wanted to reserve some of this bright green, but I wanted the rest of the leaf to be darker, I can use the wax paper to quickly do that. There's something called Frisket, which is a liquid resist, comes in little bottles, that you can do the same thing with. You paint it on, you have to use a dedicated Frisket paintbrush, and then you have to let it dry, and then you paint over it, and then you have to peel it off. That's kind of a studio thing. So that's why I like the wax paper, because it fits in a field notebook, and it's a quick and easy way to do that. I hope that answered that question. All right, I think I've got like 5 minutes. I want to just do some final tips. So I wanted to introduce this. This is a kind of an intermediate step for this primary colors idea. And I got this from Bethan Burton, who has a wonderful website, Journaling with Nature. She did the International Nature Journaling Week, which is every first week of June. And she's a wonderful artist. And she developed her own similar primary palette. But she said she likes to just kind of cheat a little by adding a second primary palette of warm colors. Yes, you can mix. So these colors here on the right, if you look down at the bottom, she uses almost the same colors I do, magenta, yellow, and cyan. But then in her palette, she also added a Scarlet Lake, a warm red, a New Gambage yellow, which is a warm yellow, and a French ultramarine. Remember, that's a warm blue, and that's a granulating, beautiful blue. So she created this. It's more advanced. I wouldn't recommend you start out this way, but this is just a really much quicker way to get to where we were with some interesting colors. So there are other ways you can do these primary palettes. And I really recommend looking into this after you got comfortable with just 3 primary colors, the true primaries, magenta, yellow, and cyan. I wouldn't jump right into this second warm primary palette. The other thing I wanted to talk about is gouache. That is another way to either fix mistakes. So in this field notebook pages here, I was at the Natural History Museum in London. I was doing this on purpose, sketching in public, because I was having a hard time sketching in public. It made me really, really uncomfortable. I hated having people see what I was doing and how bad it was or whatever. So I was making myself do this. And so I was standing, there were, thousands of people standing there. And so I was kind of rushing, and I totally forgot to leave the whites on the whale, because there were people looking over my shoulder. I had people doing selfies with me because they thought I was part of the displays. It was crazy. It's a great way to get over your fear of sketching in public. Anyway, I fixed it with white gouache, which is watercolor. It comes in tubes or pans, and it's pure white. It's completely opaque. So I was able to dab back in the white on the whale that I messed up and didn't put in. Or you can create, like I did here, whole like nighttime scenes using white gouache to create stars. That was fun. So these are good little tips to have in your toolkit. As you get more comfortable with this idea of mixing colors, don't be afraid to try mineral colors. You can mix yellow ochre, which is an earth pigment, and say lapis, or I use Sleeping Beauty turquoise. It's a color from Daniel Smith. I'll show them in just a minute, to make these beautiful greens, and it creates these really old-fashioned looking landscapes and paintings, because I'm using all these muted earth tones. So the triad concept can go further into mixing greens and purples and blues with other types of paints too, that are really fun to experiment with. So I just want to drop that in your brain to keep that in mind. These are all painted with those yellow ochres and natural mineral pigments. So it creates a very old-fashioned, cool look. This is a good example of showing all the different ranges you can get with just these colors. That rock I painted was painted with the burnt sienna and danthrone blue mix. I created the little white streaks using the wax paper. But here's a fun tip. Oops. This paint, right there, that graphite is sparkly mica. And that's what I use to add over the top of that rock to get the sparkly mica bits. So you can buy paints, and Daniel Smith has a bunch of them that are made from these natural, real mineral pigments. It's called Primatech. The one I just showed you, graphite, was from green leaf and blueberry. And this little, this was, I think, like the second little watercolor I tried in my journal ever using. And I used the Primatech, I believe I used the, rhodonite color, which is a rock, a mineral, which is a sparkly red. So these are all fun things you can look at down the road. And you can also literally paint what you see with minerals that are, with paint that are made from that mineral. So this is an example of an azurite malachite boulder at Tohono Chul Park that I painted with actual malachite azurite paint. Super fun. And those will mix and create other colors. So that's pretty fun too. So just wanted to acknowledge Bethan, who I called out earlier. You can find more than you ever want to know about color mixing from janeblundellart.com. She's the world's best expert on color mixing. Bruce McAvoy, if you ever want to go down a rabbit warren about paint and colors, Bruce has got it, handprint.com. However, I'll warn you, it's super technical, super geeky. It's really for fine artists, but it'll teach you a lot. And then Greenleaf Blueberry, love her paints. And Jack Laws teaches so many great things about this stuff. And he also advocates a cyan, magenta, yellow primary palette. So great. I know that was kind of like, but I'm hoping that gets you started. And don't forget to create one of these. I think this is a really useful, call it a star, a paint wheel, star wheel. I don't know. We'll have to come up with a term for it. But I think this will help you quickly gain lots of depth and interest in your painting without pulling out a lot of hair. So questions, and then I'll be sure to hit the ink thing at the very, very end. So feel free to unmute and ask questions. Kathy, looks like.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you tell me why you chose to do, and maybe I missed it at the beginning because a little crazy here, but why you chose this one to show as an example instead of this one?
Well, we started with that one when we were painting our primary, to create our secondaries. So we started with that one.
You started with this one.
Yeah.
And then I was just curious because the language is different.
Where's the language difference? Did I mess up?
No, you just said like on this one it has warm blue and you're using the words warm plus muted purple, warm blue, muted green, and this wheel just has the
yeah, no, that's an excellent distinction. What you just did was you called out an excellent distinction. So on the first one where we were mixing, these are the pure secondaries and tertiaries.
Mm-hmm.
Pure meaning we're just creating these colors with our primaries.
Yeah.
When I talk about outside, so here's your main primaries and secondaries there. I threw the tertiaries out on this one, but they're there. So your main color wheel is there. But when you were talking about the muteds,
Mm-hmm.
that's bringing in additional color. So in Danthrone blue is the warm blue. So that's no longer in our primary circle. So that's why it's a different language. It's different hue entirely. We're creating a new muted green. It's not a secondary color. It's a whole other type of color.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Your primaries and secondaries are embedded in here.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just showing that by going one more ring out, you can create muted colors by bringing in other elements.
Yeah, and I'm used to making those different colors with white or black, right? You're tinting and shading. So it's
another way to do it. It's just another way to do it. I wouldn't say there's any right or wrong way. This is just a really quick way so you don't have to carry the white and you don't have to carry the black.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I will quickly answer the ink color. So the pen I use is a fountain pen. This is those of you who know me have taken my classes. This is like a near and dear to my heart pen. My husband gave me this on our first wedding anniversary. It's a Mont Blanc. So it's 36 years old. And I can fill it with water. I use a waterproof permanent ink from Platinum is the ink company. And it's called Platinum Carbon. And it's waterproof and archival, so it won't fade. There's lots of different, you can use an inexpensive Uniball permanent ink pen too. That's $1.99. Any other questions on the color? I think it would be great to have you guys practice, and then I'll do a check-in. I'll either send an email or I'll just go ahead and schedule another Zoom in a few weeks. Those of you who'd like to check in and talk about problems or issues, we'll do that. Just another additional thing we can do, because it's really helpful sometimes after you've been practicing and it's like, oh, this isn't working. You can come back and say, hey, I need help. All right, everyone. Well, feel free, like I said, contact me. This is fun. I love sharing the joy of doing this. So hopefully it will give you some inspiration. So have a wonderful rest of your weekends. And we'll see you again soon.